Hello, my friend. Thank you for coming back and sitting with me today. I don't know what comes to your mind when you think of the word father. Maybe you think of a man who laughed easily. Maybe you think of someone strict. Maybe someone quiet. Maybe someone who worked more than he talked. Or maybe you think of a father you spent many years trying to understand. Some fathers know how to say what they feel. They hug easily. They say, "I love you." They write long birthday cards. They know how to put tenderness into words. But there are other fathers too. Fathers who do not speak that way, not because they do not love, but because they grew up in a time when many men were taught to be steady, to work hard, to provide, to fix what was broken, and to keep the softer things somewhere deep inside. So their love does not always come out in long sentences. Sometimes it comes out in smaller ways. A driveway shoveled before anyone wakes up. A porch light left on until the car pulls in. A full tank of gas before a long drive. A tire checked in silence. And sometimes it comes out as one very simple sentence. Text me when you get home. Today I want to tell you about a father like that. His name was Frank Walker, and his daughter's name was Emily. It took Emily nearly half her life to understand that her father was not a man who did not know how to love. He was a man who had been speaking love in a very quiet language, a language she was too young to understand at first. Frank Walker lived in a small town in western Michigan. He had worked as a mechanic for almost 40 years. A small garage near the edge of town, a metal roll-up door, the smell of motor oil in his jacket, an old radio that played country music most mornings, and on his workbench, there was always a gray shop towel he used to wipe his hands. Frank was not a talkative man. When customers brought their cars in, he usually asked only what he needed to know. When did it start making that noise? Or, how long has that light been on? Then he would lean over the engine and get to work. When the job was done, he wiped his hands on that gray towel, wrote the invoice, and said, "You're all set," to Frank. That was enough. He was not cold. He just did not use many words. His wife, Linda, understood this better than anyone. She used to tell friends, "Frank can fix just about anything in this house, except his own feelings." Whenever she said that, Frank would take a sip of coffee and say, "I talk when I need to." Linda would smile. "That's the problem. You don't think you need to very often." Frank would not argue. He would just look down into his coffee, as if the answer might be somewhere in the cup. Frank and Linda had one daughter, Emily. When Emily was little, she loved spending time in the garage with her father. She liked the smell of oil, the sound of the old radio, the way her father could open the hood of a car and somehow know what was wrong. She liked when he handed her a small flashlight and said, "Hold it right there for me." Emily felt important then, as if, without her holding that light in exactly the right place, the whole car might never run again. Frank was not generous with praise, but sometimes, if Emily stood still long enough, if she did not shake the flashlight, if she did not ask too many questions all at once, he would say, "That's good," just 2 words. But when Emily was small, those 2 words could make her happy for the rest of the evening. On winter mornings, Emily sometimes woke up to find snow covering the windows. School was still open. The air outside was cold enough to turn every breath white. But the walkway from the front door to the driveway had already been shoveled. The windshield on Linda's car had already been scraped clean. Frank had done all of it before anyone else was awake. He never said, "I did that for you." He simply walked through the kitchen, poured coffee into his travel mug, and said, "Wear your good boots. It's slick out there." That was Frank. Quiet, practical, always watching for things other people might slip on, forget, or fail to prepare for. When Emily was very young, she did not think much about it. Children can sometimes understand love by instinct. They can feel it in a jacket placed over their shoulders, in breakfast waiting on the table, in someone standing outside in the cold to warm up the car. But as Emily grew older, she began to want something else. Not more money, not more gifts, words. At school, she heard her friends talk about their fathers. "My dad said he was proud of me after the concert. My dad wrote me the sweetest birthday card. My dad always says I love you before he hangs up. Emily would hear things like that and think of Frank. Her father never forgot her birthday, but his cards were short. Happy birthday, Dad. Some years, if he was feeling especially bold, he added, love, Dad. Frank always bought the cake she liked. He always checked the car before she drove anywhere far. He always stood near the door until she pulled out of the driveway. But he rarely said the things Emily wanted to hear. One year, when Emily was 16, she sang in a school concert. She was part of the choir, not a soloist. Nothing grand, but to a 16-year-old girl, that night still mattered. After the concert, Linda hugged her and said, "You sounded beautiful, honey." Frank stood beside her with both hands in his coat pockets. He looked at Emily and said, "You stood up straight." Emily blinked. "What?" Frank nodded. "On the risers, you stood tall, looked confident." That was his compliment. But at 16, Emily mostly heard what was missing. She had wanted to hear, "I'm proud of you," or "You did great." She gave a small smile and walked ahead to the car. Frank stood there for a few seconds after she left. He knew he had not said enough. He just did not know what sentence was supposed to come next. When Emily turned 16 and started driving, Frank became worried in the way Frank became worried. He did not say, "I'm scared something might happen to you." He did not say, "I'm not used to you being out on the road by yourself." He checked the tires. He checked the oil. He checked the brake lights. He checked the windshield wipers. Whenever Emily was getting ready to drive somewhere, Frank would stand by the door or out near the garage. "You got gas?" "Yes, Dad." "Which way are you taking?" "Lake Street, then Maple." "Don't take Maple tonight. They're doing road work." "I know. Text me when you get home." The first time he said it, Emily almost laughed. "Dad, I'm just going to Sophie's house." "It's 10 minutes away." Frank looked at her. 10 minutes is still road. Emily sighed. "Okay, I'll text you." When she got to Sophie's house, she sent him one word, "Here." A few seconds later, Frank replied, "Good." Just one word. Good. No heart. No emoji. No have fun. No love you. Just good. Emily showed the phone to Sophie and laughed. "That is so my dad." Sophie laughed too. But somewhere inside, Emily still wished he had written a little more. When Emily was 18, she left home to attend college in Ann Arbor. The night before she moved out, Linda helped her fold clothes and pack boxes. Frank was out in the garage, checking the old car Emily would be taking with her. He changed the oil, filled the tires, checked the brakes, then placed a thick blanket, a flashlight, jumper cables, and a small toolkit in the trunk. Emily walked into the garage. "What are you doing?" Frank did not look up. "Putting a few things in." "Dad, I'm going to college. I'm not driving across Alaska." Frank closed the trunk. "It's an old car. Old cars need things." Emily leaned against the garage door frame. She wanted to ask, "Are you sad I'm leaving?" But looking at her father wiping his hands on the gray shop towel, she said nothing. Frank asked, "What time are you leaving tomorrow?" "Around 8. You fill the tank?" "Yes." "You have cash?" "I have a card." Frank frowned. "You have cash?" Emily smiled a little. "A little?" He nodded. "If anything happens, call me." "I know. And text me when you get there." Emily looked at him. "I'm going to call Mom." "Call your mother. Then text me." "You don't want me to call you too?" Frank seemed slightly uncomfortable. "You can call." Then he added quickly, "Texting is fine." Emily did not know what to do with that answer, so she only said, "Okay." The next morning when Emily pulled out of the driveway, Linda stood on the porch, waving, tears on her cheeks. Frank stood behind her with his hands in his coat pockets. He did not cry. He did not wave much. He only said, when Emily rolled down the window, "Check your mirrors." Emily smiled. "I know, Dad." Frank nodded. "Text me when you get there." "I will." Then she drove away. In the rearview mirror, her parents became smaller behind her. Her mother was still waving. Frank was standing still. And Emily told herself, "Dad's probably fine." What she did not see was that after her car turned the corner, Frank stayed on the porch for a long time. Linda went back inside first. Frank remained there, looking down the empty street. Then he walked into the garage and sat down on the old wooden stool where Emily used to sit when she held the flashlight for him. The radio was playing softly. The gray shop towel lay on the workbench. Frank rested both hands on his knees and looked at the empty space in the garage. And for the first time in years, the house felt strangely larger. Almost 3 hours later, Emily arrived at her dorm. She called her mother first. Linda asked everything. "Are you there? What's the room like? Has your roommate come yet? Did you eat anything? Do you need another blanket?" Emily answered each question. After she hung up, she remembered her father. She texted him, "Made it." A few seconds later, Frank replied, "Good." Emily looked at the screen. One word. She let out a small breath. She was standing in a strange room, with boxes still unopened, students laughing somewhere down the hall, and the first day of a new life beginning around her. And her father had only said, "Good." Emily locked her phone. She was not angry, only a little sad, a small sadness she would carry for many years without quite knowing what to call it. In the years that followed, Emily's life slowly grew wider. College, friends, her first job, her first apartment, her first bills. Good days, hard days, days when she felt capable, days when she felt like a little girl pretending to be an adult. She called her mother more often than she called her father. Linda was easier to talk to. She asked questions. She listened for a long time. She told stories about neighbors, church, the grocery store, and the dog next door that kept wandering into the backyard. Frank usually said only a few things when Linda handed him the phone. "Car running okay? How's work? Don't let the gas tank get too low when it's cold." Emily would say, "It's fine, Dad." Then there would be silence, not because they did not love each other. They just did not know how to keep the conversation going. One year, Emily drove home for Thanksgiving. It was her first year working after college. She was tired, not only from the job, from realizing that being an adult was harder than she had imagined. When it was time to drive back to her apartment, the sky was gray. There was not much snow yet, but the roads were damp and cold. Frank stood in the driveway wearing his heavy coat. He walked around her car, kicked each tire lightly, as if the tire might answer him. Emily stood beside the driver's door. "Dad, I already checked everything." Frank said, "I'm checking too. I'm grown, you know." Frank looked up. Grown people get flat tires. Emily laughed, though part of her felt impatient. Linda hugged her for a long time. "Drive safe, honey." "I will." Frank stood behind her. He said, "Roads might freeze tonight." "I know. Don't follow trucks too close." "I know. Text me when you get home." Emily sighed. "You always say that." Frank looked at her. "Because you always leave." That sentence made Emily pause, but Frank had already bent down to adjust one of her windshield wipers, as if he had not just said something tender. Emily did not know how to answer, so she got in the car. When she reached her apartment, she was so tired she forgot to text. She changed clothes, ate something small, and fell asleep on the couch. Near 11 that night, her phone buzzed. A message from Frank. "Home?" Emily opened her eyes and saw it. She typed back, "Yes. Sorry, forgot." Frank replied, "Good." Emily stared at that word. This time she did not laugh. She felt a little guilty. But the next morning, work returned. Emails came in. Life kept moving, and the feeling drifted away, the way many small feelings do. Not gone, just covered by the next thing. Years passed. Emily married a man named Ryan. They had a little girl named Grace. When Grace was born, Frank became a grandfather, and strangely enough, he seemed a little softer with Grace. Not much, but enough for Emily to notice. Frank was not especially good at baby talk. He did not sing lullabies. He did not make silly faces. He did not use sweet little voices. But every time Emily brought Grace to visit, Frank checked the car seat. He would bend down, pull the strap, shake the seat gently, tighten the buckle. Emily would say, "Dad, Ryan installed it." Frank would answer, "I'm just checking." When Grace learned to walk, Frank installed a small gate at the top of the stairs. No one asked him to. He measured, cut, drilled, and screwed it into place. When he was done, he stood back and said, "That's better." When Grace turned 3, Frank started keeping a box of animal crackers in the kitchen cabinet. If Grace ran in and asked, "Grandpa, do you have cookies?" Frank would open the cabinet, take down the box, and say, "Maybe." Then he would give her 2, even though Linda had said only 1. Emily watched all of this. Part of her felt warmed by it. Another part of her felt an old ache. She thought, why is he softer with Grace than he ever was with me? She knew that was not entirely fair. Frank was older now. Grace was his granddaughter. People sometimes become softer a little later in life. But inside Emily, there was still a small part of the 16-year-old girl after the school concert. The girl who had waited to hear her father say, "I'm proud of you." The 18-year-old in the dorm room, looking at the word "good" on her phone, wishing it had been longer. One winter, when Emily was 43, Linda came down with pneumonia and had to stay in the hospital for a few days. It was not life-threatening, but it was enough to worry everyone. Emily drove back to her hometown to help her father. When she walked into the house, Frank was standing in the kitchen, trying to warm up a pot of soup Linda had made before she got sick. He was wearing an old flannel shirt. His reading glasses sat low on his nose. On the table was a sheet of paper with Linda's medication schedule written in Frank's large, uneven handwriting. Emily set her bag down. "Dad, did you eat?" Frank said. "I ate." Emily looked at the sink. There was only 1 spoon. "You had soup?" "And bread." Emily did not say anything more. She took out another bowl, warmed up some soup, and sat down with him. The kitchen was quiet, very much like the old evenings, but different too. Linda was not home. Grace was not running through the rooms. Ryan was not talking sports with Frank. It was just father and daughter, sitting across from each other at the kitchen table. Emily asked, "Do you need me to stay a few days?" Frank answered quickly, "No, you've got work. You've got Grace. I can manage. I've got it." Emily looked at him. She had heard that sentence all her life. "I've got it." Frank always had it. The car, the roof, the bills, the snow on the driveway, the things people needed before they knew they needed them. But he almost never said he needed anyone. That night, after they came back from the hospital, Emily slept in her old room. The room had changed. The walls had been painted. The old bed had become a guest bed. The posters from high school were gone. But in the small desk drawer, Linda had kept a few of Emily's old things. A ribbon from choir, a graduation photo, a keychain from college, a few birthday cards. Emily sat on the edge of the bed and went through them slowly, not looking for anything, only touching pieces of the life that had once been hers. She found a birthday card from the year she turned 18. On the front was a little car, driving down an autumn road. Inside, Linda had written almost a full page. At the bottom, Frank had written, "Drive safe, Dad." Emily gave a soft laugh. Of course, even in a birthday card, Frank was telling her to drive safe. She was about to put the card back when a folded piece of paper slipped out. It was old. The handwriting was Frank's. At the top it said, "Before Emily leaves for Ann Arbor." Below that was a list. Oil changed, brake lights checked, tire pressure, blanket in trunk, flashlight, jumper cables, cash in glove box. Emily stopped at the last line, cash in glove box. She remembered now. On the day she arrived at college, she had opened the glove compartment and found an envelope with $40 inside. There had been no note. She had assumed her mother put it there. But at the bottom of the paper, Frank had written one more line. "Don't tell her. She'll say she doesn't need it." Emily sat still. The room was very quiet. Downstairs, she could hear Frank closing a kitchen cabinet. She looked back at the list. For all those years, she had remembered the word "good" as something too short. But she had not known that behind that word was a man who had changed the oil, checked the brake lights, put a blanket in the trunk, placed cash in the glove compartment, and waited for her message all afternoon. Emily opened a few more cards. Inside one from the year Grace was born. Linda had written about the baby. At the bottom, Frank had written, "She looks strong. Dad." Emily smiled. Again, Frank. But inside that card was another small folded note. Maybe Linda had tucked it in there and forgotten. On it was another list Frank had written. Before Emily brought Grace for her first visit. Check car seat. Fix loose porch step. Buy outlet covers. Animal crackers. Small blanket for Grace. And at the bottom of the page, one more line. Emily looked tired. Don't mention it, just help. Emily placed her hand over her mouth. That sentence made her go quiet. Not because it was beautiful, because it was true. So very frank. He had seen that she was tired, but he did not know how to say, "Are you okay?" He did not know how to say, "I'm worried about you." He did not know how to say, "Rest for a while. I've got the baby." He had only thought, "Don't mention it. Just help." Emily sat there for a long time, with the old papers on her lap. There are things we wait for people to say in words, for many years, and then one day, we realize they may have been saying them another way. Not perfectly, not in the way we wished, but truly. The next morning, Emily woke early. Frank was already in the kitchen. The coffee was made. 2 pieces of toast sat on a plate. He was standing by the window, looking out at the thin snow on the driveway. Emily walked in. "You're up early." Frank did not turn around. Habit. She poured herself coffee. For a moment, they stood in the quiet kitchen. Then Emily said, "Dad." "Yeah?" "I found the list you wrote before I left for Ann Arbor." Frank turned around. "What list?" "The car list." He said nothing. His face tightened a little, as if he had been caught doing something private. Emily said, "You put cash in my glove compartment?" Frank looked down at his coffee. "Yeah." "Why didn't you tell me? You would have said you didn't need it." Emily smiled faintly. "I probably would have." Frank said, "Long drive, old car. You were 18? Emily nodded. Then she said, "I also found the note from when Grace was born." Frank did not speak. Emily repeated it gently. Emily looked tired. "Don't mention it, just help." Frank stood very still. After a moment, he said, "You look tired." Emily looked at him. "You noticed?" Frank frowned slightly. "I have eyes." Emily laughed, not loudly, but truly. Frank almost smiled too, though he tried to hide it. The kitchen became quiet again. Emily held her coffee with both hands. "You know, Dad." She stopped, because this was something she had carried for many years, not like a great wound, more like a soft place that still hurt when touched. "For a long time I thought maybe you didn't really see me." Frank looked at her. Something in his face changed. Not defensive, just sad. Emily continued, "I knew you loved me. I did. Somewhere inside I knew. But sometimes I wanted you to say more." Frank looked down at the table. His hands were wrapped around his mug. They looked older now, rougher, with small cracks from the cold. He said very quietly, "I was never good at that." Emily nodded. "I know." Frank let out a breath. "I thought if the car ran, if you had gas money, if you got home safe, you'd know." Emily felt her eyes sting. "I did know. Part of me did. But sometimes I still wanted to hear it." Frank looked out the window. Snow was falling softly again. Then he said, "I should have said more." Emily shook her head gently, not to excuse everything, but to keep him from sinking too far into regret. Maybe we both needed to understand each other sooner. Frank looked at her. Then he nodded, a very small nod. But Emily knew her father. For Frank, that nod was a long paragraph. Emily stepped a little closer. "Dad." "Yeah? I understand it now." Frank looked at her. "Understand what?" "When you said text me when you get home." He did not say anything. Emily continued, "When I was younger, I thought it was just you being worried, or you not knowing what else to say. But I get it now. That was your way of saying you wanted to know I was safe, that you wanted to know I made it, that you could rest once you knew I was home." Frank turned his face away, but Emily saw his eyes grow red. He wiped at one corner quickly, as if it were just the light from the window. Then he said, "I still should have said it." Emily smiled gently. "You can say it now." Frank looked at her. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Emily did not push him. She did not try to make the moment bigger than he could handle. She only stood there, the way she had once stood in the garage as a little girl, holding the flashlight steady, giving him room to see what he needed to see. After a while, Frank said, "I love you." It was not smooth. It did not sound like a line from a movie. His voice was rough. The words seemed unfamiliar in his mouth, like a shirt he had not worn before. But he said them. Emily stepped forward and hugged him. Frank stood stiff for 1 second. Then he placed one hand on her back, patted twice. Awkwardly, honestly, Emily closed her eyes. She was no longer the 18-year-old girl, standing in her dorm room, wishing the word good had been longer. She was no longer the young woman who had hoped her father would know how to comfort her after a hard day. She was a grown daughter, holding her aging father in the old kitchen. And finally, she understood. Not too late, not perfectly, but enough. Linda came home from the hospital 2 days later. Emily stayed through the weekend, not because there was so much left to do, but because she wanted to. On Saturday morning, Frank went outside to shovel the driveway. Emily put on her coat and followed him. "I'll help," Frank said immediately. "You don't have to. It's cold." Emily picked up the other shovel. "I know it's cold. I grew up here." Frank looked at her. "You're doing it the hard way." Emily laughed. "Oh, you haven't even seen me start." "I know." So there they were, father and daughter, standing in the light snow, each holding a shovel. They did not talk much. They simply moved snow from the driveway to the yard, the scrape of the shovel against concrete, their breath white in the cold air. A car passing slowly down the street. After a few minutes, Frank said, "You're back okay?" Emily smiled. My back is fine." "Oh, don't lift with your back. Use your legs." "I know, Dad." And this time she heard the language underneath. Careful, practical, short, but no longer empty. When they finished, Frank knocked snow off his gloves. Then he said, "Thanks." Emily looked at him. A thank you from Frank was not nothing. She smiled. "Thank you too." "For shoveling?" "No." Frank waited. Emily said, "For all the times you waited for me to text that I got home." Frank looked down at the cleared driveway. Then he said, "Yeah, just that." But this time Emily did not need more. A few weeks later, Emily went back to her own home. Life continued. Grace had preschool. Ryan had work. Emily had emails, bills, appointments, quick dinners, and mornings when no one could find the car keys. But one small thing had changed. When Frank called, Emily no longer heard his short questions as empty ones. "Car running okay?" Now she heard, "I'm thinking about you. Roads might freeze tonight." She heard, "I want you safe." Grace still like animal crackers. She heard, "I miss my granddaughter." One evening, Emily called her father. Linda was in the living room watching television. Frank answered in the kitchen. "Hey," Emily said, "I just wanted to check on you and Mom." "We're good." "What are you doing?" "Fixing the back door lock. It's loose." Emily smiled. "Of course he was." Frank asked, "Car's still running all right?" "It's fine, Dad. Tires holding air." "Yes." There was a small silence. Years earlier, Emily might have felt uncomfortable in that silence. Tonight, she let it be there. Then she said, "Dad?" "Yeah?" "I love you." The other end went quiet. Not for long, but long enough for Emily to imagine her father standing in the kitchen, phone in his hand, looking down at the floor, trying to find his way through the words. Finally, Frank said, "Same here." Emily smiled. "Same here what?" Frank sighed softly. I know, but I want to hear it." Another quiet pause. Then Frank said more slowly, "I love you too." Emily closed her eyes. The words came later than she once wished, but they came. And some things, even when they arrive late, can still warm a very old place in the heart. That spring, Emily brought her family to visit Frank and Linda for a weekend. Grace ran around the backyard. Linda sat on the porch with a light sweater around her shoulders. Ryan helped Frank repair a loose board on the front steps. On Sunday afternoon, when it was time for Emily to drive home, Frank walked around her car again. Emily stood near the driver's door, holding her coat. This time she did not feel impatient. She let him check. He bent down to look at the tires, touched the hood of the car, stood up and wiped his hands on his jeans. Roads should be fine. Emily nodded. Okay. Might rain after 6. We'll leave before then. Frank looked into the back seat where Grace was buckled in. Car seat tight. Yes, Dad. He looked for another second anyway. Then he stood beside Emily's door. Linda hugged Emily first. Grace waved from the back seat. Ryan shook Frank's hand. Then Emily hugged her father. This time Frank hugged her back sooner. Not for very long, but not stiffly like before. When Emily opened the car door, Frank said, "Text me when you get home." Emily turned and looked at him. Years ago, that sentence had felt like something missing. Now it felt warm. "I will." Frank nodded. Emily added, "I love you, Dad." Frank hesitated only a little. Then he said, "I love you too." Still not perfectly smooth, but clearer now. Emily smiled. She got into the car and pulled out of the driveway. In the rearview mirror, she saw Frank and Linda standing on the porch. Linda waved. Frank stood still, one hand raised just a little, the way he had done for most of her life. But this time, Emily did not think her father felt less. She saw a man who had loved in his own language for so long that he may not have known it was a language at all. When Emily reached home, rain had just begun to fall. Ryan took Grace inside first. Emily stayed in the car for a few seconds. The rain tapped softly against the windshield. She took out her phone and texted her father. Made it home. A little while later, the phone lit up. Frank. Good. Emily looked at that one word and smiled. No disappointment. No waiting for it to be longer, because this time she could hear the whole sentence underneath it. Good. It meant, I was waiting. I was worried. I'm glad you're safe. Now I can rest. Emily set the phone down, leaned back against the seat, and in that small, quiet moment, she realized that some love had not been missing. It had only been spoken in a voice she was too young to understand. You know, I think there are many fathers like Frank, not because they do not love, but because no one ever taught them how to let love come out easily, as words. They grew up in homes where men did not always talk about feelings, where being tired was hidden behind work, where tenderness often showed up as a repaired step, a paid bill, a car warmed up in winter, or a man standing outside until the taillights disappeared down the road. And I think there are many sons and daughters like Emily too, people who knew, somewhere inside, that they were loved, but still wished it had been said more clearly, wished the hug had lasted longer, wished one more question had been asked, wished their father had said, "I'm proud of you," or simply, "I love you." What I find beautiful about this story is not that Frank became a different man. He did not suddenly become talkative. He did not turn into someone from a movie. He was still Frank, still checking tires, still shoveling snow, still fixing the back door lock, still texting one word, "Good." But he tried to say more, and Emily learned to hear more, not only the words her father had never said, but also the quiet things he had been saying all along. Maybe you have someone like that in your life, someone who loved clumsily, someone who cared, but did not always know how to show it, someone who placed love inside small, practical things, so quietly that you did not recognize it at the time. And if that person is still here, maybe there is still a small door open, not to demand that they become someone else, but to see them more gently, to understand the language they used, and maybe, if there is room, to let a few words finally be spoken. If today's story made you think of your father, or of someone who loved you in a quiet, practical, imperfect way, I hope you hold that feeling gently, not as blame, not as regret, but as a warm reminder that love does not always speak in the same voice. Some people say it in long letters, some say it with a hug, some say it by leaving the porch light on, some say it by asking, "Car running okay?" or "Text me when you get home." If you can still call that person today, maybe it does not have to be a perfect conversation. Maybe it begins with something simple. "How are you, Dad?" Or, "I was thinking about you." Or maybe, if the words still feel hard, you can simply stay on the phone a little longer than usual. Thank you for sitting with me today. I truly appreciate it. I wish peace for you and for the people you love. Until our next story, take good care of yourself. And if there is someone in your life who once loved you quietly, I hope today you are able to see it, even just a little. This is Companion, stories that remind us what truly matters.